There's a specific, agonizing kind of silence in a neurological intensive care unit. It's not actually quiet. It's a terrifying, synthetic rhythm of mechanical breaths, hissing oxygen, and beeping heart monitors that tell you the only thing keeping your child alive is a wall of machines. When Hathaway Jenkins stood over the shattered, unrecognizable body of her 19-year-old daughter, Maya, she didn't just feel grief. She felt a cold, calcifying rage. The official police report called it a necessary use of force during a hostile resistance. The bruised, swollen face of her honor roll student told a profoundly different story. The Oak Ridge Police Department thought they had silenced a nobody, brushing her under the rug of their systemic corruption. They didn't realize they had just woken a mother who was about to burn their entire empire to the ground. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday when the phone rang. Hathaway Jenkins, a senior neonatal nurse who had spent her life pulling fragile lives back from the brink, woke with the immediate, visceral dread that only a mother knows. Maya, her only child, a sophomore studying architecture at the state university, was supposed to be home from a late-night study group hours ago. Is this Hathaway Jenkins? The voice on the other end was clinical, detached. Yes. Who is this? This is Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital. You need to come down here immediately. Your daughter, Maya Jenkins, has been admitted. She's in critical condition. The drive to the hospital was a blur of neon streetlights and blinding panic. Hathaway's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles ached, her mind racing through 100 horrific scenarios, none of which came close to the reality waiting for her. When she burst through the emergency room doors, demanding to see her daughter, she was met by a wall of scrubs and solemn faces. Dr. Harrison Mills, a colleague she had known for 10 years, pulled her aside. He couldn't meet her eyes. Hathaway, it's bad, Dr. Mills said, his voice trembling slightly. She suffered massive blunt force trauma to the head and torso, severe cerebral hemorrhaging, 3 broken ribs, a shattered orbital bone, and a collapsed lung. We had to place her in a medically induced coma to stop the brain swelling. Hathaway, she was beaten. Hathaway felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Beaten? By who? Was she mugged? Where are the police? The police brought her in. Dr. Mills whispered, looking nervously over his shoulder toward the waiting room. Hathaway. The police are the ones who did this. Pushing past him, Hathaway marched into the ICU. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight. Maya, her bright laughing girl with dreams of building sustainable housing in low-income neighborhoods, looked completely broken. A thick plastic tube was taped to her mouth, breathing for her. Her face was a horrific canvas of purple and black, swollen to twice its normal size. A heavy footstep behind her broke the silence. Hathaway turned to see a broad-shouldered police officer leaning casually against the doorframe. His uniform nameplate read, G. Donovan. He was chewing gum, looking at Hathaway with a mixture of boredom and veiled contempt. You the mother? Officer Gregory Donovan asked, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. What did you do to my daughter? Hathaway's voice was dangerously low, a tremor of pure shock masking the rising fury. Donovan shrugged, his expression utterly devoid of empathy. Your kid made some bad choices tonight, ma'am. We pulled her over for a broken taillight on Route 9. She became erratic, aggressive, refused to comply with lawful orders. When my partner and I tried to detain her, she went for my weapon. We had to use subduing force. It's unfortunate, but she brought it on herself. A broken taillight? Hathaway stared at him, her chest heaving. Maya weighs 120 pounds. She has never been in a fight in her life. You expect me to believe she attacked 2 armed police officers over a traffic stop? I don't expect anything, ma'am. I'm just telling you what's in the report, Donovan replied, his tone hardening. He stepped closer, towering over her, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. Maybe you didn't know your daughter as well as you thought. Kids get into bad stuff, drugs, bad crowds. The investigation will show it was a clean stop. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the sterile linoleum hallway. Hathaway looked back at Maya's still form. She reached out, gently holding her daughter's unbruised hand. In that moment, the terrified mother died, and a relentless force of nature was born. "I'm going to find out what they did to you, baby," Hathaway whispered into the hum of the machines. "And I am going to make them pay." By Thursday morning, the Oak Ridge Police Department had mobilized its PR machine, and the cover-up was in full swing. Hathaway sat in her living room, watching the local news broadcast. On the screen stood Police Chief William Carter, a silver-haired, politically connected veteran of the force, flanked by Captain Richard Hayes and a representative from the police union. "The Oak Ridge Police Department is committed to transparency and the safety of our community," Chief Carter droned into the microphone, looking deeply solemn. "Regarding the incident on Tuesday night involving 19-year-old Maya Jenkins, preliminary internal reviews indicate that Officers Donovan and Kessler acted strictly within departmental guidelines. The suspect exhibited extreme hostility, under what we suspect may have been the influence of illicit narcotics, and posed an immediate lethal threat to the officers on the scene," a reporter shouted from the press pool. "Chief Carter, the family is stating the injuries are inconsistent with a standard subduing technique. They allege severe police brutality. Will you release the body cam footage of the arrest?" Carter didn't blink. "Unfortunately, due to a highly unusual technical malfunction with our server sync that evening, the body cam footage from both officers was corrupted. However, we have recovered audio fragments that corroborate the officers' accounts of the suspect screaming and resisting." Hathaway threw her coffee mug at the television. It shattered against the wall, a dark stain dripping down the paint. Corrupted, the most convenient word in the police dictionary. The media assassination followed immediately. Anonymous police sources leaked to the press that Maya had a prior record. It was a juvenile citation from when she was 15 for being at a high school party where alcohol was present, a charge that had been expunged. But on the news, it was twisted to paint her as a troubled youth with a history of defiance. They were building a narrative, piece by piece, to justify nearly beating a teenager to death. Hathaway hired a lawyer, a sharp but overworked civil rights attorney named David Sterling. David sat at her kitchen table, looking over the sparse official reports with a grim expression. "Hathaway, I need to be brutally honest with you," David said, rubbing his temples. "This department is notoriously corrupt, and Chief Carter has the mayor and the judges in his pocket. Without that body cam footage, it's Maya's word against two decorated officers. And Maya. Maya can't speak right now, so we just let them get away with attempted murder?" Hathaway asked, her voice tight. "I'm filing a preservation order for all dispatch logs, GPS vehicle data, and personnel files," David replied. "But they will stonewall us. They'll tie this up in court for years, hoping you run out of money and give up. They are relying on you feeling helpless. They picked the wrong mother," Hathaway said. She realized then that playing by their rules would get her nowhere. If the system was designed to protect the predators, she had to dismantle the system from the outside. She needed evidence that couldn't be redacted by a police captain or dismissed by a bought and paid for judge. She started with the scene of the crime. According to the police report, the traffic stop occurred on the corner of Industrial Avenue and 4th Street, an abandoned warehouse district on the edge of town. It was a strange route for Maya to take. She should have been on the interstate coming home from the university. Why was she out there, that night, armed with a heavy flashlight and a cold determination? Hathaway drove out to the industrial park. The area was desolate, lit only by flickering, amber street lamps. Empty warehouses with shattered windows loomed in the dark. She parked exactly where the report stated Donovan's cruiser had stopped. She walked the asphalt, looking for anything skid marks, blood, a piece of torn clothing, but the street sweepers had already been through. The police had sanitized the scene perfectly. Hathaway stood in the middle of the road, looking around in a slow 360-degree circle. The police cruisers didn't have functioning dash cams, and the body cams were corrupted. But this was the 21st century. Someone, somewhere, is always watching. Her eyes scanned the facades of the decaying buildings, mostly empty husks. But across the intersection, nestled between a boarded-up textile mill and a chain-link fence, sat an old, rusted auto salvage yard, Penhaligon's towing and scrap. Mounted high on a rusted corrugated iron pole, barely visible in the shadows, was a small, weather-beaten security camera. It was pointed directly at the intersection. Hathaway's heart hammered against her ribs. The police had either missed it in the dark, or they assumed it was a dummy camera for a defunct business. Tomorrow morning, she was going to find out. The bell above the door of Penhaligon's towing and scrap jingled a harsh, metallic note as Hathaway walked in the next morning. The office smelled of stale tobacco, motor oil, and old paper. Behind a counter cluttered with spark plugs and invoices sat Arthur Penhaligon, a man who looked like he had been constructed out of beef jerky and wire. "We're closed to the public," Arthur grunted, not looking up from a carburetor he was tinkering with. "Mr. Penhaligon, my name is Hathaway Jenkins. My daughter was severely beaten by police officers right outside your gates on Tuesday night." Arthur froze. He slowly set down his wrench and looked up, his eyes narrowing beneath bushy gray eyebrows. "I saw the news. They're saying she attacked him." "They're lying," Hathaway said, stepping up to the counter. "She's in a coma. They almost killed her. I noticed you have a camera on that pole outside. I need to know if it works, and I need to see what it recorded." Arthur let out a long, raspy sigh, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. He looked nervous, his eyes darting toward the window. "Look, lady, I don't want any trouble with the OPD. Donovan and Kessler. They ain't regular cops. They run this district like a cartel. They find out I helped you. My business burns down mysteriously in the night. Or worse." "Arthur," Hathaway said, her voice dropping to a plea that was entirely raw and broken. "My daughter might never wake up. She is 19. I don't have a husband. I don't have a big family. Maya is my entire world. Please, if there is any humanity left in this town, please help me." Arthur stared at her for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the dusty shop was deafening. Finally, he cursed under his breath, tossed the rag onto the counter, and walked into the back office. "Lock the front door and pull the blinds down," he called out. Hathaway did as she was told and hurried into the back room. Arthur was booting up a dust-covered desktop computer. "The camera's old. Black and white, no audio," Arthur muttered, clicking through a clunky interface. "But it runs 24/7 on a loop. Overwrites every week. Tuesday night, you said? Around 1:30 a.m.? Yes." Arthur dragged the slider back. The screen showed the grainy, static-laced intersection. At 1:28 a.m., a small sedan, Maya's Honda, rolled into the frame and stopped at the red light. A moment later, an unmarked black SUV aggressively cut off the Honda, boxing it in. Two figures stepped out. Even in the grainy footage, Hathaway recognized Donovan's hulking silhouette and the slimmer build of his partner, Thomas Kessler. "That ain't a traffic stop," Arthur whispered, leaning closer to the screen. The officers didn't approach Maya's window. Instead, they walked over to the trunk of their own SUV. Kessler opened it, and Donovan pulled out a heavy duffel bag. Another car, a sleek luxury sedan with tinted windows, pulled into the intersection from the opposite direction. A man stepped out, handing Donovan a thick envelope in exchange for the duffel bag. "My God," Hathaway breathed. "They were making a drop. Drugs or money. And your kid was sitting right there at the red light," Arthur said grimly. On the screen, Maya could be seen in the driver's seat. The glow of her smartphone illuminated her face. She was holding it up against the windshield. She was recording them, Hathaway gasped. Maya saw the exchange, and she filmed it. Donovan noticed the flash of the phone screen. The footage showed him violently pointing toward Maya's car. The luxury sedan sped off instantly. Donovan and Kessler drew their weapons and sprinted toward the Honda. What followed was a nightmare captured in 30 frames per second. Kessler shattered the driver's side window with the butt of his gun. Donovan reached in, unlocked the door, and violently yanked Maya out of the car by her hair. Maya hit the pavement hard. She scrambled to hold onto her phone, but Kessler kicked her in the ribs, sending the device skittering across the asphalt. Maya raised her hands in total surrender, curling into a ball on the ground. But the officers didn't stop. Donovan struck her in the face with his heavy Maglite flashlight. Once. Twice. Kessler drove his knee into her back. The beating was systematic, relentless, and completely unprovoked. It went on for nearly 3 minutes. Hathaway stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face, her hand covering her mouth to stifle a scream. She was watching her child be tortured. Eventually, Maya stopped moving entirely. Donovan casually walked over, picked up Maya's phone from the street, and slipped it into his pocket. Kessler dragged Maya's limp body toward her car, leaving her slumped against the tire before finally calling it in on his radio. The video ended. Arthur sat back in his chair, visibly pale. Jesus Christ. They murdered her. Not yet, Hathaway whispered, wiping the tears from her face. The sorrow was gone, completely consumed by an inferno of purpose. Arthur, I need a copy of this video, right now. I'm burning it to a flash drive, Arthur said, his hands shaking as he worked the computer. But Hathaway, you take this to the local DA. They'll bury it. The district attorney plays golf with Chief Carter every Sunday. They'll say the video is doctored, or they'll just make the flash drive disappear in evidence. I know, Hathaway said, taking the silver flash drive from him and gripping it so tightly it dug into her palm. I'm not taking it to the police. I need Maya's phone. Donovan took it because he knew it had the high-definition footage of their drug deal. That phone is the key to bringing down the whole department. How are you going to get a phone out of an evidence locker or a dirty cop's house? Arthur asked, looking at her like she was a ghost. Hathaway's eyes were cold, calculating. I'm going to find the weakest link in their armor. And I'm going to break it. As she walked out of the scrapyard, the morning sun was just beginning to break over the city of Oak Ridge. Hathaway Jenkins had the truth in her pocket. Now, she needed a weapon, and she knew exactly where to start. Officer Thomas Kessler. Donovan was a sociopath, but Kessler. Kessler had hesitated for a split second on that tape before joining the beating. Kessler was scared. And scared men make mistakes. The sterile, fluorescent hum of the hospital was Hathaway's domain. For 20 years, she had navigated its corridors, memorizing its blind spots and back channels. If the Oak Ridge Police Department had a monopoly on violence, Hathaway had a monopoly on secrets. People forget that nurses see everything. The broken bones, the blood work, the insurance denials, the private tragedies that drive people to do desperate things. Officer Thomas Kessler was a desperate man. Hathaway spent 2 sleepless nights digging. She didn't sleep. She survived on black coffee and a maternal adrenaline that burned like battery acid. Using a borrowed administrative login from a sympathetic night shift clerk, she accessed the hospital's master patient index. She cross-referenced Kessler's name, looking for a vulnerability. She found it under his wife's name. Chloe Kessler. Chloe had been admitted 3 times in the last 6 months for aggressive, advanced-stage multiple sclerosis. The notes from the billing department painted a grim picture. Their health insurance had capped out. The experimental therapies keeping Chloe out of a wheelchair cost upwards of $10,000 a month out of pocket. That's why he took the dirty money, Hathaway realized, staring at the glowing monitor. That's why he didn't stop Donovan. It didn't excuse him. Not for a second. But it gave Hathaway the leverage she needed. On a rainy Thursday evening, Hathaway waited in her car across the street from the Kesslers' modest suburban home. At 7 p.m., a marked cruiser pulled into the driveway. Thomas Kessler stepped out, looking exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, his uniform wrinkled. He didn't look like the untouchable enforcer who had shattered her daughter's ribs. He looked like a man slowly drowning in his own life. Hathaway waited until he went inside, gave it 20 minutes, and then walked up to the front door. She didn't knock. She rang the doorbell, a sharp, cheerful chime that felt entirely out of place. The door opened. Kessler stood there in a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, holding a half-empty beer. When his eyes focused on Hathaway's face, a face he had seen crying in the ICU just days prior, the color instantly drained from his cheeks. The beer bottle slipped a fraction of an inch in his grip. "Mrs. Jenkins," he breathed, his voice barely a rasp. "Hello, Thomas," Hathaway said. Her voice was ice. "Invite me in, or I can stand on your porch and scream to your neighbors about how you and Gregory Donovan beat a 19-year-old girl into a coma to cover up a felony drug syndicate." Kessler looked panicked, glancing over his shoulder into the house. "You need to leave. You can't be here. My wife is sick. I know all about Chloe." Hathaway interrupted, stepping forward so the toe of her shoe crossed the threshold. "I know about the MS. I know about the unpaid medical bills at Oak Ridge Memorial. And I know how you suddenly managed to pay off $30,000 in arrears last Wednesday, the day after you nearly killed Maya." Kessler's jaw clenched. He opened the door wider, defeated, and gestured for her to step into the dimly lit hallway. "Chloe is asleep upstairs," he whispered frantically. "Please, keep your voice down." Hathaway walked into the living room. It was painfully ordinary. Family photos lined the mantel. A pair of women's orthopedic shoes sat by the sofa. "I don't have time for a conscience, Thomas, and neither do you," Hathaway said, turning to face him. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of 8x10 glossy photographs. She tossed them onto the coffee table. They were high-resolution stills printed from Arthur Penhaligon's flash drive. The first showed Donovan handing over the duffel bag to the luxury sedan. The second showed Kessler smashing Maya's window. The third was a horrifying, undeniable shot of Kessler's boot connecting with Maya's spine as she curled on the asphalt. Kessler collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. A ragged, pathetic sob tore out of his throat. Donovan said she was a scout for a rival dealer. He said she pulled a weapon. "It happened so fast. I didn't know what we were doing until it was already happening." "Don't you dare lie to me," Hathaway hissed, leaning over him. She was holding a phone. "She recorded the drop. You beat her to destroy the evidence, and you took the phone." "I didn't take it. Donovan took it," Kessler cried, looking up with bloodshot, terrified eyes. "I wanted to call an ambulance immediately. He wouldn't let me. He said we had to get our story straight. He kept the phone to wipe it, but he couldn't crack the passcode. He's holding on to it until his tech guy from the city comes down this weekend to format it." "Where is it?" "Hathaway, please," Kessler begged. "If Donovan finds out I talked to you, he'll kill me. He'll kill Chloe. You don't understand who he answers to. It's not just the chief, the man in that sedan, the buyer." Kessler swallowed hard. "That was Judge Harrison Foley. They run the seizure auctions. They steal cartel cash and narcotics from evidence, and Foley launders it through dummy real estate corporations." Hathaway felt a chill radiate through her chest. Judge Foley was the most powerful magistrate in the county. He was the one who signed the warrants. He was the one who dismissed complaints against the police. The corruption wasn't just a few bad apples. The entire tree was rotten to the roots. "I don't care if it's the President of the United States," Hathaway said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Where is my daughter's phone?" "Donovan's hunting cabin," Kessler whispered, completely broken. "Up on Blackwood Ridge. He has a wall safe hidden behind the gun rack. He bragged about it. He put the phone in there. Give me the address. And the code to the gate." "I don't know the safe combination," Kessler pleaded. "It's an old mechanical dial, but it's reinforced. Just give me the address, Thomas." Kessler grabbed a pen from the end table and scribbled an address on a receipt. He handed it to her, his hand shaking violently. "If you go up there, and he catches you, he will bury you in those woods, Hathaway. No one will ever find you." Hathaway took the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in her pocket. "If Maya dies, I'm already dead. I have nothing left to fear." She looked down at him with absolute disgust. "You have 48 hours to take your sick wife and get out of this state. Because when I burn this department to the ground, I won't care who gets caught in the flames." Blackwood Ridge was a 30-minute drive outside the city limits, a dense, unforgiving expanse of pine trees and winding, unpaved logging roads. The rain that had started in the suburbs turned into a torrential downpour by the time Hathaway's tires crunched onto the gravel of Donovan's private driveway. It was 11:45 p.m. According to the shift schedules she had memorized, Donovan was currently working the graveyard shift. He wouldn't be off until 6 a.m. She had a 6-hour window. The cabin was a sprawling, arrogant structure of dark timber and river stone, sitting isolated at the edge of a ravine. There were no neighbors for miles. Hathaway parked her car a half-mile down the road, hiding it behind a thicket of overgrown blackberry bushes. She hiked the rest of the way in the freezing rain, dressed entirely in black, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag. Inside were tools she had procured from the hospital's maintenance closet. A heavy-duty crowbar, a cordless industrial drill, titanium bits, and a portable battery pack. She approached the back of the cabin. The security system was sophisticated, but Kessler had given her the bypass sequence for the exterior panel. She punched in the numbers, holding her breath. A tiny green light blinked. The alarm was disabled. Using the crowbar, she forced the lock on the heavy oak back door. It splintered with a loud crack that echoed like a gunshot over the sound of the rain. She froze, listening. Nothing but the wind howling through the pines. She slipped inside, clicking on a small, red-filtered flashlight. The interior of the cabin smelled of stale cigars, leather, and gun oil. Animal heads stared down at her from the walls with glass eyes. It was a monument to killing. Hathaway moved methodically, sweeping the beam across the living room until she found it. A massive, custom-built wooden gun rack displaying half a dozen high-powered rifles. Kessler had said the safe was behind it. She gripped the edge of the heavy wooden rack and pulled. It swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a solid steel wall safe embedded directly into the stone chimney. It was an old-school mechanical dial safe, just as Kessler had described. A brute force entry on a solid steel door would take hours, maybe days, without explosives. But Hathaway wasn't trying to open the door. She was a nurse. She understood anatomy. If you can't go through the bone, you go through the soft tissue. She ran her flashlight around the edges of the safe where it met the stone chimney. The mortar holding the safe in place was thick, but it wasn't steel. Hathaway pulled the heavy-duty drill from her bag. She attached a thick masonry bit. If she could drill out the mortar surrounding the locking bolts on the side, she might be able to wedge the crowbar in and warp the frame enough to pop the door. She pressed the drill against the stone and pulled the trigger. The noise was deafening in the empty cabin, a high-pitched, grinding scream of metal biting into rock. Stone dust flew into her face, coating her eyelashes and mixing with the sweat on her forehead. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Her arms screamed with lactic acid burn, but she didn't stop. Every time she felt her strength failing, she pictured Maya's bruised, swollen face connected to those breathing tubes. The rage fueled her muscles, pushing her past human exhaustion. Finally, the drill punched through. She had created a gap between the safe and the stone housing. Hathaway dropped the drill, grabbed the crowbar, and wedged the flattened end deep into the newly drilled hole. She planted her feet against the stone wall, gripped the iron bar with both hands, and threw her entire body weight backward. The metal groaned. The muscles in Hathaway's back tore and popped, but she didn't let go. She pulled with the strength of a mother fighting for her child's life. With a sickening crack, the steel frame warped. The internal locking bolts slipped free of their housing, and the heavy door popped open an inch. Hathaway fell backward onto the hardwood floor, gasping for air. She scrambled back to her feet, her hands bleeding and raw, and pulled the safe door fully open. Inside sat stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands, a few velvet jewelry boxes, and several Ziploc bags filled with white powder. But Hathaway ignored all of it. Sitting on the top shelf, next to a backup service weapon, was a pale pink smartphone with a cracked screen protector. Maya's phone. Hathaway snatched it up. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She plugged the phone into her portable battery pack. For 10 agonizing seconds, the screen remained black. Then, the white Apple logo appeared. "Please," Hathaway prayed silently. "Please let the video be there." The phone booted up to the lock screen. It required Maya's 6-digit passcode. Hathaway knew it instantly. It was her own birthday, combined with Maya's, 081203. The phone unlocked. Hathaway went straight to the camera roll. The most recent file was a video, time-stamped, Tuesday, 1:29 a.m. She pressed play. The video was shot from the dashboard mount of Maya's car, recording in crystal clear 4K resolution. It captured everything. The audio was pristine. "What is going on?" Maya's voice whispered from the phone speaker, sounding terrified. "Why are they blocking me?" Through the windshield, the video showed Donovan and Kessler opening the trunk. It showed Judge Harrison Foley stepping out of the luxury sedan under the glare of the street lamp. His face was perfectly illuminated. "Judge Foley." "A pleasure." Donovan's voice rang out clearly on the recording. 50 keys of the cartel seizure, just like we discussed. The chief expects his 20% by Friday. "It's in the trunk, Gregory. Just make sure the evidence log shows it was incinerated," Judge Foley replied, handing over the thick envelope. Then, the video captured the moment Donovan turned and saw Maya's car. It captured his face contorting into rage. It captured Kessler smashing the window, the terrifying screams of her daughter, and the brutal, sickening sounds of the assault as the phone fell to the floorboards, continuing to record the audio of the beating until Donovan picked it up and ended the video. Hathaway clutched the phone to her chest, her whole body shaking with a violent mixture of horror and absolute triumph. She had them. She had the chief of police, the most powerful judge in the county, and the men who broke her daughter. It was an airtight, undeniable confession recorded in high definition. She zipped the phone into her waterproof jacket pocket, grabbed her duffel bag, and turned to leave. Suddenly, the gravel outside crunched. Headlights swept across the living room windows, casting long, frantic shadows across the floor. A vehicle had just pulled into the driveway. Hathaway froze. She checked her watch. It was 2:15 a.m. Donovan wasn't supposed to be off shift for 4 more hours. A heavy car door slammed shut outside. Heavy, familiar boots stomped onto the wooden porch. Keys jingled in the lock. Donovan was home early. Panic seized Hathaway's throat. There was no back exit from the living room. The only way out was the front door where Donovan was currently turning the key, or the kitchen, which led back to the splintered oak door she had broken to get in. She sprinted for the kitchen just as the front door swung open. "Who the hell is in here?" Donovan roared, his hand instantly going to his holster. He saw the beam of her flashlight sweep across the wall. Hathaway didn't look back. She bolted through the kitchen, her boots slipping on the polished wood. She hit the splintered back door with her shoulder, bursting out into the freezing rain and the pitch-black night. "Stop right there," Donovan bellowed from inside the cabin, drawing his weapon. Hathaway scrambled off the back porch, plunging blindly into the dense, muddy tree line of Blackwood Ridge. She heard Donovan curse violently behind her as he discovered the warped, open safe. "I'm going to kill you." His voice echoed through the ravine, a sound of pure, unhinged fury. Gunfire erupted. A bullet slammed into a pine tree mere inches from Hathaway's head, showering her with bark and splinters. She ducked low, letting the darkness and the torrential rain swallow her as she ran for her life, clutching the instrument of their destruction tightly to her chest. The hunt had begun. But Donovan didn't realize he wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. The forest was a pitch-black labyrinth of jagged branches, freezing mud, and driving rain. Hathaway scrambled down the steep embankment of the ravine, her boots sliding uncontrollably on the slick pine needles. Behind her, the rhythmic, heavy thud of Donovan's boots signaled a terrifying reality. He knew these woods. He was a hunter, and she was bleeding, exhausted, and running entirely on the fumes of maternal adrenaline. "You're not making it to the highway, bitch!" Donovan's voice boomed through the trees, warped by the howling wind. Another gunshot rang out, the muzzle flash momentarily illuminating the timberline. The bullet struck a boulder to her left, sending a shower of razor-sharp stone shrapnel across her cheek. Hathaway bit down on her lip to keep from screaming. She could taste copper in her mouth. She kept moving, clutching her waterproof jacket tightly against her chest to protect Maya's phone. Then, she saw it. A faint red beam slicing through the darkness, sweeping methodically across the trunks of the pines. A laser sight. Worse, Donovan was carrying a high-powered rifle equipped with a thermal imaging scope. In the freezing rain, Hathaway's 98-degree body was glowing like a beacon on his screen. Running in a straight line was a death sentence. Hathaway's clinical mind, trained to remain calm while arteries sprayed and monitors flatlined, took over. She needed to mask her heat signature. She remembered crossing a shallow, fast-moving creek about a quarter-mile back when she was hiking to the cabin. She veered sharply to the right, plunging into a dense thicket of thorns that tore at her clothes and skin. She didn't feel the pain. She heard the rush of water before she saw it. Without hesitating, Hathaway slid down the muddy bank and waded chest-deep into the glacial rushing water of Blackwood Creek. The shock of the cold was a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending a million needles into her skin. She forced herself to crouch low, submerging her shoulders and neck, keeping only her face above the surface, sheltered under the overhanging roots of an ancient oak tree. Less than 2 minutes later, Donovan appeared on the bank. He was a terrifying silhouette against the storm, holding the rifle to his eye. He swept the thermal scope back and forth across the creek bed. Hathaway held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she was terrified the water would ripple. The icy water was rapidly dropping her core temperature, blending her thermal output with the freezing environment. Donovan stood there for an agonizing 60 seconds. He lowered the rifle, cursing violently, kicking a heavy stone into the water. "I will find you," he roared to the empty woods. He turned and began marching back up the ridge, likely assuming she had circled back toward the logging road. Hathaway waited until her limbs went completely numb and her vision began to blur at the edges from hypothermia. Only then did she drag her trembling, freezing body out of the water. She stumbled the remaining half-mile to her hidden car, driven by pure, mechanical will. When she collapsed into the driver's seat, she locked the doors, blasted the heater, and plugged Maya's phone into the dashboard to ensure it didn't die. She knew she couldn't take this to the local Oak Ridge FBI field office. If Judge Foley was laundering cartel money through the police department, the rot could easily extend to the local federal agents. She needed an entity entirely outside of the city's jurisdiction. She needed a nuclear option. Hathaway pulled out her own laptop from the back seat and connected it to her cellular hotspot. Her fingers were stiff and blue, barely able to type, but the fire in her eyes was inextinguishable. She didn't just upload the video to a cloud server. She built an email distribution list that would ignite a firestorm. To make the story undeniably reliable and impossible to cover up, she targeted heavyweights. She addressed the email to Benjamin Crump, the renowned national civil rights attorney who had built a career destroying corrupt police departments. She added Wesley Lowery, the Pulitzer-winning journalist, known for his relentless data reporting on police use of force. She included the direct tip lines for the New York Times, CNN, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., and a decentralized international hacktivist collective known for doxing corrupt officials. The subject line was simple: Oak Ridge PD attempted murder and cartel laundering. Confession video attached. She attached the 4K video file from Maya's phone, along with high-resolution photos of the financial ledgers she had snapped inside Donovan's safe, and the exact GPS coordinates of the cabin. She hit the upload button. Progress. 12%. 34%. Suddenly, the night lit up with blinding red and blue strobe lights. 3 Oak Ridge police cruisers roared down the logging road, blocking her car in. Donovan had radioed his shift commanders. The cavalry had arrived. Officers poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn, shining blinding spotlights into Hathaway's windshield. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands up." "Do it now," a voice commanded, over a megaphone. Hathaway didn't move. She stared at the progress bar on her laptop screen. Progress. 78%. 89%. An officer smashed his baton against her driver's side window. The glass spider-webbed. "I said step out of the car." Progress. 99%. The glass shattered inward, showering Hathaway with glittering shards. A heavy hand grabbed her by the wet jacket, hauling her violently out of the driver's seat and slamming her face first into the freezing mud of the road. She felt a knee drive into her spine the exact same way they had done to Maya. cold steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around her wrists, cutting into her skin. "Got her," a cop sneered, pulling her head up by her hair. Chief Carter said to bring her to the precinct holding cell. "No cameras." Hathaway spat a mouthful of mud onto the officer's boots. She looked up at the shattered window of her car, straight at the glowing screen of her laptop on the passenger seat. A small, green checkmark had appeared on the screen. Message sent. Hathaway smiled, a chilling, bloody grin that made the arresting officer take a subconscious step back. "Take me wherever you want," she whispered. "By sunrise, none of you are going to have a precinct to bring me to." By 6 a.m. on Friday morning, the city of Oak Ridge didn't just wake up. It detonated. The digital payload Hathaway had deployed from the freezing front seat of her shattered car hit the internet with the force of a tectonic shift. It began at 3:14 a.m. when Wesley Lowery, a journalist whose career was built on dismantling systemic police abuse, opened his encrypted inbox. By 3:45 a.m., he had verified the digital signatures on the 4K video. By 4:30 a.m., civil rights titan Benjamin Crump was on a conference call with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. When the sun finally crested the horizon, casting long, gray shadows over the Oak Ridge Police Department, the video of Maya Jenkins being brutally beaten while a sitting judge purchased cartel narcotics had amassed 45 million views. It was the #1 trending topic globally. The servers for the local city government crashed under the sheer volume of incoming traffic, but inside the subterranean holding cells of the Oak Ridge precinct, a heavy, ignorant silence reigned. Hathaway sat perfectly still on a freezing, bolted-down metal bench. Her clothes were soaked through with swamp water and mud, her wrists bruised raw by the iron handcuffs, and a jagged cut on her cheek was crusted with dried blood. She had been denied a phone call, denied medical attention, and denied even a cup of water. At 7:15 a.m., the heavy steel door at the end of the cell block groaned open. Footsteps echoed down the concrete corridor. Chief William Carter appeared on the other side of the iron bars, looking impeccably tailored in his dress uniform. Beside him stood Officer Gregory Donovan, a fresh bandage over his knuckles, and a smug, predatory grin plastered across his face. "Well, Mrs. Jenkins," Chief Carter said, his voice dripping with condescension as he rested his hands on his duty belt. "You've had a very busy night. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, theft of a firearm, and assaulting a police officer. You're looking at a minimum of 20 years in a state penitentiary. Your daughter is going to wake up an orphan, assuming she wakes up at all." Donovan leaned against the bars, chewing a piece of gum. "I told you, lady, you should have just stayed out of it. We found your laptop. We smashed it to pieces. Whatever you thought you were doing, it's over. You lost." Hathaway slowly raised her head. The exhaustion in her eyes was entirely eclipsed by a chilling, absolute calm. She looked at the clock mounted on the concrete wall above Carter's head. It read 7:18 a.m. "I didn't lose, William," Hathaway whispered, her voice raspy but terrifyingly steady. "And you didn't smash anything that mattered. You just destroyed the receipt." Carter frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his polished features. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you have roughly 60 seconds left as a free man," Hathaway replied, a bloody smile touching the corners of her lips. Before Carter could respond, a thunderous crash shook the ceiling above them. It sounded like the entire front facade of the precinct had been breached. Alarms began to blare, a chaotic, shrieking siren that echoed down the stairwells. Heavy boots, dozens of them, were pounding down the concrete steps toward the holding cells. "What the hell is that?" Donovan barked, his hand instinctively dropping to his holster. The door to the cell block was kicked open with such force it shattered the reinforced glass window. Through the threshold poured a tidal wave of men and women in dark windbreakers and heavy tactical gear, the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their chests. Behind them were heavily armed United States Marshals carrying assault rifles. "Hands away from your weapons! Do it now!" A voice roared over the din. Carter froze, his face draining of all color. Donovan took one look at the federal agents pouring into the corridor, and made a fatal miscalculation. He turned and sprinted toward the rear utility exit of the cell block. "Suspect is running," a marshal shouted. A senior agent in a tailored suit stepped forward, ignoring the fleeing officer for the moment. This was Special Agent Richard Sterling of the FBI's Anti-Corruption Task Force. He walked straight up to Chief Carter, whose hands were trembling so violently he could barely keep them at his sides. "William Carter," Agent Sterling said, his voice cutting through the ringing alarms. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, obstruction of justice, and violating the civil rights of Maya Jenkins under the color of law. Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Carter stammered, looking around as if expecting his own officers to save him. But the few local cops present had already been disarmed and pushed against the walls by the feds. The chief of police was forcefully spun around, and the humiliating click of handcuffs echoed in the corridor. Agent Sterling then turned to Hathaway's cell. He pulled a master keyring from a confiscated guard and unlocked the heavy iron door. He stepped inside, his hardened expression softening into genuine respect. "Hathaway Jenkins?" he asked gently. "Yes," she replied, slowly standing up. "Benjamin Crump sent us." "Ma'am," Sterling said, producing a small key to unlock the cuffs binding her bruised wrists. "The Attorney General has personally federalized this building. You are free to go. We have a medical team waiting for you upstairs, and an escort ready to take you back to the hospital." As the heavy steel cuffs fell to the floor, the true scale of the karma Hathaway had unleashed began to manifest across the state. Gregory Donovan hadn't made it far. Realizing the precinct was surrounded, he had managed to slip out through a storm drain grate, hijack a civilian's idling pickup truck, and make a desperate break for the county line. But the video had already been broadcast to every law enforcement database in the region. He wasn't intercepted by his own corrupt deputies. He was boxed in by a specialized tactical unit of state troopers' men who harbored a vicious, burning hatred for dirty cops who tarnished the badge. When Donovan's stolen truck was rammed into a concrete median on Interstate 95, he refused to surrender. Drunk on his own perceived invincibility, he kicked open his jammed door and reached for his backup weapon. The troopers didn't hesitate. They unleashed a physical reckoning that mirrored the exact brutality Donovan had inflicted on Maya. They dragged his massive frame through the shattered window glass, throwing him face first onto the unforgiving asphalt. When he thrashed and threw a punch, a trooper drove a heavy knee squarely into Donovan's spine. By the time they dragged him up to read him his Miranda rights, his jaw was fractured in 3 places, his orbital bone was crushed, and his nose was shattered. The official federal arrest report would later cite injuries sustained while violently resisting a lawful apprehension. The irony was a bitter, poetic, and utterly satisfying justice. Meanwhile, downtown, Judge Harrison Foley was in the middle of a televised sentencing hearing for a low-level drug offender, lecturing the young man on the sanctity of the law. The heavy mahogany doors of his courtroom flew open. 6 federal marshals marched straight down the center aisle, their boots echoing like gunshots against the hardwood floor. The gallery gasped. The bailiffs stepped back, utterly powerless. "Harrison Foley," the lead marshal announced, projecting his voice so every microphone in the room picked it up. "Step down from the bench. You are under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to distribute Schedule I narcotics, and judicial corruption." Foley's arrogant facade completely collapsed. He practically fell out of his high-backed leather chair, his black robes tangling around his legs as the marshals hauled him to his feet. He wept openly, sobbing and begging as they slapped the irons on his wrists in front of the local news cameras. His assets were frozen immediately, his dummy corporations seized by the Treasury Department, and he was staring down the barrel of 2 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Officer Thomas Kessler, the weak link, took the coward's way out, but the universe offered him no mercy. He surrendered immediately, offering to testify against Donovan, Carter, and Foley in exchange for a lighter sentence. The federal prosecutors happily took his testimony, but they stripped him of his pension, revoked his badge, and handed him a mandatory 12-year federal bid. Because his income was proven to be tied to a criminal enterprise, the state seized his bank accounts. He lost the house, he lost the stolen money, and he lost his freedom. realizing too late that his complicity had destroyed the very family he was trying to save. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked. Hathaway Jenkins had driven a nuclear warhead through it. Over 45 officers were suspended, indicted, or fired in the ensuing federal sweep. The mayor resigned in utter disgrace by noon. The Oak Ridge Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, its leadership gutted and replaced. 3 weeks later, the terrifying, synthetic rhythm of the neurological intensive care unit finally changed. Hathaway was sitting in the familiar vinyl chair beside the hospital bed. The bruises on her own face were fading into dull yellow shadows. She was holding a worn copy of Maya's favorite architecture textbook, reading aloud about the structural integrity of cantilever bridges, when she felt a faint, almost imperceptible pressure on her right hand. Hathaway's breath hitched. She stopped reading. The book slipped from her lap and hit the linoleum floor with a soft thud. She looked down. Maya's fingers were twitching. "Maya?" Hathaway whispered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She stood up, leaning over the bed. "Baby, can you hear me?" Slowly, agonizingly. Maya's eyelids fluttered. The horrific swelling had subsided, revealing the beautiful, bright face Hathaway thought she might never see again. The heavy breathing tube had been removed days ago, replaced by a simple nasal cannula. Maya's dark eyes, clouded with a heavy fog of medication and confusion, darted around the ceiling before finally locking onto her mother's face. A single tear slipped down Maya's cheek. She tried to speak, her voice a dry, broken rasp that sounded like sandpaper against wood. "Mom?" Hathaway completely broke. She collapsed forward, burying her face into the crook of her daughter's neck, sobbing with a profound, overwhelming, earth-shattering relief. It was the sound of a woman who had walked through the fires of hell and successfully dragged her child back into the light. "I'm here, baby." Hathaway wept, pressing desperate kisses to Maya's forehead, her cheeks, her trembling hands. "I'm right here. You're safe now. I promise you, you're safe. They can never, ever hurt you again." Maya managed a weak, exhausted squeeze of her mother's hand. Did they get away with it? Hathaway looked down at her beautiful, resilient daughter, the afternoon sun streaming through the hospital window to bathe them in a warm, golden glow. A fierce, protective pride settled deep in Hathaway's chest. "No, my sweet girl," Hathaway smiled, wiping the tears from her own cheeks. "Mommy made sure they lost everything." The story of Hathaway Jenkins remains a towering testament to the terrifying, unstoppable force of a mother's love. When the very system designed to protect citizens transforms into a predatory syndicate, the average person is expected to bow down and accept defeat. Hathaway refused to kneel. Armed with nothing but clinical precision, fierce intelligence, and an absolute refusal to let her daughter become a silenced statistic, she single-handedly dismantled an entrenched, corrupted empire. The Oak Ridge Police Department believed they held all the power, failing to realize that true power does not reside in a badge or a gavel, but in the righteous fury of a parent defending their child. Maya Jenkins eventually recovered, walking out of that hospital to continue her architecture degree, building a future on the ashes of the corrupt men her mother burned to the ground. Justice, ultimately, was not served by the law. It was demanded by a mother,